Alrighty, in this video what we're going to do is set up our IOC for our database so that we can access our database from within our systems. And we're also going to start working on our main lobby service. So the service that's responsible for receiving all the players and listing all the players and creating lobbies and all that fun stuff, as well as actually integrate our database in with our login system. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do here is I want to bring over my connection string into my app.config in my BuzzMMO server master, and I can just grab it from buzzmmo.web and pull it in like this. So then I'm just going to grab this connection strings area, copy that, jump back over into the app.config that's in, actually not BuzzMMO server, I'm going to want to do it from master here, and come over here to this app.config and paste it in. So there are better ways to handle configuration, particularly on a per environment scenario, so our configuration isn't tied into our build system. But right now this will allow us to move forward quicker, and in the future we'll go ahead and address that. So of course also make sure to, oops, we don't use that anymore, so we can delete that. In your app.release.config, if your server is different from your if your database server is different in your release configuration than your main configuration, make sure to go ahead and add that to your transformation. But with that out of the way, we can go ahead and expose our database to our entire system, first by making sure that we have a reference to buzzmmo.data, because that has our database context class in it, so make sure you have that reference. And now that we have made sure we have that reference, we can hop into our master server context, which is responsible for setting up all the services that our system has access to. And how about below we do our systems, and I can nuke those curlies. After we register our systems, I can simply say builder.register type, and then I can say MMO database, or MMO database context, I believe is what I called it. And then I'm going to say as self, so it instantiates it as itself, and I'm also going to say dot instance per dependency. So everything that depends on this class is going to get a new instance of it. And we see we have an error, probably something like Entity Framework isn't referenced, but that's easy to fix. To make sure that I'm grabbing the same version of Entity Framework in our BuzzMMO server master that our data uses, I'm going to right-click the solution and jump on down to Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. And what's this window do? I've never seen this window before. Consolidate. Huh, whatever. So let's jump over into installed, and they've certainly made this prettier. Jump down, find Entity Framework. And I'm going to come down here to where it's installed on, and I'm just going to click on server and master or region because we need both of those. So we'll go ahead and hit install, and that should go ahead and pull down the same version for both of these packages. So we're going to let Visual Studio do whatever Visual Studio wants to do. Oftentimes that's the best course of action. And we're going to give it a sec. Okay, so we have that installed in one project and now in another project. We're also going to want to make sure that we have the MySQL driver. MySQL driver pulled down. So I'm going to pull down MySQL data entities into our server and master. And it looks like they're already there. So I think we are done with that. I also want to make sure that our configuration for Entity Framework is similar to that in our web. So if I open up the web.config, I do believe I had to go in here and tell it that the MySQL driver is the one I wanted to use. So if I see here, code configuration type is all that stuff, providers as MySQL data client, and DB provider factories, MySQL data provider, I'm probably going to have to grab all of that as well. So I'm going to grab the system data and the Entity Framework config. I'm going to jump back over to server master, open up my app.config, and I'll go ahead and do this side by side so I see what I'm doing here. And we have this Entity Framework section, and I'm just going to replace the Entity Framework section with what we have in web.config to make sure that we have the proper connection factory and all that fun stuff. So make sure we properly do that. And then I'm also going to add in system data our DB provider factories, in this case the MySQL data providers. So now our code should work with MySQL. So basically we just took the configuration from another project we had it configured on and moved over the important bits. But with that out of the way, we can go ahead and close out these two files. And jumping back into the master server context, there is another service that I want to register. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a new line here. I'm going to say builder.register type. And I'm going to say register type main lobby service, because I want this main lobby service to be accessible to our systems. So I'm going to say main lobby service dot, and then I'm going to do single instance, and whoops, dot as self. And then single instance. Now, obviously, if we were doing, more TDD style, whatever, and we wanted to abstract the main lobby service into an interface, we would register the main lobby service as the interface that we would be hiding it behind. But in this case, I'm just exposing it as itself. I'm simply using our IOC container to help manage the lifetime of all of our different components and the relationships between them. But with that out of the way, we can hop over into the systems and we can actually go ahead and implement both our login and our debug login, because it turns out it's not really a whole lot of code. So what I'm going to do here for my normal login, my token login, I'm going to say if string is null or white space token, and then I'm going to return a deferred.fail saying invalid token, and then of course we have to do fail of user details, so we get the properly strongly typed thing there. So if it's an invalid token, go ahead and tell them it's an invalid token. Next up, we'll go ahead and get the token record out. So I'm going to say var token record equals database, and we don't have database injected into this class yet. That's something I kind of forgot to do a moment ago. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to come up here to the top of the class, and I'm going to create a constructor, and I'm going to ask for a MMO database context. There you go, ReSharper. I'm going to call it database. I'm also going to ask for a main lobby service, and I'm just going to call this main lobby. So I'll go ahead and take these two parameters and alias them out to local private read-only fields. So now we have access to our database and our main lobby. And of course, that's all we had to do, because AutoFac is going to go and wire up those dependencies for us that we just configured in our server context. So for our token record, I'm simply going to say database.clientAuthentications tokens, and I'm also going to go ahead and say include, and I'm going to say now I want to pull in an include overload that is an extension method, and it's going to require me to bring in entity. So if I hit enter here, that's going to bring a using entity somewhere up here, using system data entity up here on line 2. So make sure you had that, otherwise you're not going to get these all of these overloads, because they are extension methods. So I'm going to say include t goes into t.user, so that we, in this one query, we find the token and all the data relating to that particular user. And then I'm simply going to say .first or default, t goes into t.token equals token. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if token record is null, which is going to be the default value if it didn't find anything, go ahead and return deferred.fail of user details and say something like just invalid token. Just give them back the same error message. Doesn't matter really what you pass in there. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write a login method on our context. So I'm going to say context. Remember, context is the context for this current connection. And I'm going to say login for token record.user. And all that's going to do, all the login method's going to do, we'll write it here in a moment after we finish debug login. But all it's going to do is it's going to store the authentication data in the context. So now for our debug login, I'm simply going to go ahead and say var user equals database, and for this I'm simply going to say users.find user ID, and then I'm going to say if user is null, return deferred.fail of user details, and say invalid user ID, and then I'm going to say context.login user, and maybe we can clean this code up a little bit by taking those log statements and moving them down, or remove them entirely if you're done with them or whatever, but I'll just leave them in. Okay, so we only have one last thing to do here, and that's going to be returning the user details. I didn't implement properly the deferred successes on both these, on both line 47 and 59. So what that's going to do is, I'll nuke that. I'm simply going to say return, let's see here. How would I want to do that? I'm going to say context.user, user details. And then I'm going to do the exact same line of code here. So they're practically identical lines of methods. The only difference is one we get a user from a token, the other one we get a user just by ID. And I'm referencing this user details property, but it doesn't exist yet. And I'm calling it user details, the property on the context that represents the currently logged in user. I'm calling it user details because I want to differentiate between a user entity that's coming from the database that's tracked by Entity Framework and a user details object, which is just going to be this sort of DTO that contains user details information. But now we can go ahead and jump into our context and implement our login and our login method and user details property. So coming over here, we can open up our, let's see here. Actually, in my BuzzMMO server, I want to go into client context, and I want the client context to be able to be authenticated. So this is the base client context for any servers that you might implement. And for this, I'm going to scroll up here to the top, and I'm going to create a public user details, get private set. And I'm also going to go ahead and create a convenience method here. I'm going to say public bool is authenticated. And this is going to be a simple property that'll say user details does not equal null. So I'm using the new C#6 syntax for declaring a get-only property. Okay, so now we can come down here and we can say public void login, and I'll say user, and I'm going to grab the BuzzMMO data entities class, user, and I'm going to say if is authenticated, throw new RPC exception. And I'm throwing an RPC exception because I want this exception to be propagated to the user. This message doesn't contain any information that I don't want to send back to the user if the user initiated this action. And I'm going to say client already authenticated. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say user details equals new user details, passing in user.id, user.username, and user.roles. And this is, I'm going to have to instantiate a new hash set of string for user.roles, so user.roles. And it'll actually be user.roles.select, R goes into r.name. So right here, I'm just converting the user roles property, its navigation property, into a IEnumerable of strings, and then I'm turning that into a hash set. And with that in mind, because the roles does require us to traverse a many-to-many relationship, I will actually jump back into the login system, which should now be finished. We don't get any more errors. But in our client authentication tokens.include, I'm going to go ahead and also say... I should be able to do this. I should be able to say then include. I forget the... can I even do this? Can I include that and then include that? Because usually there's a, like a dot then include, or am I thinking about in Hibernate? Because I know it's in Hibernate. Let's go ahead and see if that works. And with that, also, we can go ahead and change this database user's find user ID. We can actually change this to grab that, grab all his roles in one database query as well, so we're not doing multiple database queries. By doing users.users.include, u goes into u.roles.first or default, u goes into uid equals user ID. So just changing that code a little bit around to make it more performant. Hopefully this code will work. We'll find out soon enough. But now we can go ahead and see about joining the main lobby. So to join the main lobby, again, we log in successfully, and then we load up the lobby scene. Then we tell the server, okay, we're ready to receive all the lobby information. And right now we say simply we throw a new RPC exception not implemented. But actually, it's really simple here. I'm going to go ahead and say return main lobby. Remember, main lobby was the service that we acquired through the constructor injection. Main lobby.add player, passing in our context. Then I'm going to say on success, and I'm going to pass in a single line closure here, and it's just going to say on success context.systems.destroy login system. So the idea here is once you join the main lobby, it will, if it successfully joins the main lobby, it'll go ahead and destroy our login system, and that game object will disappear on the client because it's no longer needed at this point. So now we can actually talk about the implementation of mainLobby.addPlayer. So mainLobby.addPlayer is going to go ahead and do some checks, first of all, to make sure that that we can add the player. Then it's going to enqueue something in our fiber, and then it's going to perform a bunch of other stuff. And before we do this, we have to talk about the possibility, since we're in a multi-threaded scenario, it's possible for clients to disconnect during this process. So we have to synchronize with the client. And the way that I'm going to implement that is through an event on the client context that I can latch into when it's disconnected, and also a flag to indicate if the client context has disconnected between two lines of code, and we're going to see an example of using that in a moment here. So over here in my client context, I'm going to go ahead and open up the client context. Remember, this is the base client context, and I'm going to introduce a feature to be aware of when it disconnects. So that feature is going to be, first of all, I'm going to create a private, now this is private, Boolean, or private volatile Boolean, and it's going to be called is connected, or is disconnected. How about is connected? And we'll just initialize it to true in the constructor. And then I'm going to create a public Boolean is connected, goes into is connected. So again, I'm using the C#6 syntax here to make this really quick property. But the reason I'm doing a property here in a backing field as opposed to using an auto property, so I can mark the Boolean as volatile. And the volatile keyword prevents the value of that variable to get passed around by register values. And register values are not going to be synchronized between threads, because obviously when you do a context switch on the CPU, your registers will get changed and all that fun stuff. So the volatile keyword basically just makes it so every time we try to access this variable, we'll always receive it from memory. So there's a degradation of performance, but it also makes it so that when thread A changes this value, there's no way that that old value can be cached on thread B, which would result in us receiving stale data. I'm also going to go ahead and create a public event action, and I'm going to call this disconnected. So this disconnected event will be fired whenever our client context disconnects. So inside of our constructor, we do want to go ahead and initialize is connected to true. And now we want to handle the disconnect action. So I'm going to scroll down to wherever this guy gets disconnected. So on disconnect. And on disconnect is also called when dispose is called. Remember, dispose calls transport disconnect, which will result in on disconnect being called. Why did I make that internal? I don't know why I made that internal. Oh, so I can access it directly here on the on disconnect. Okay, that's fine. We can leave it as internal. So I'm going to go ahead and say is connected is false. I'll do this after all of this stuff. And then I'm going to say disconnected question mark dot invoke, and we'll just do that. Actually, I'm going to invoke, I'm going to have disconnected receive the client context instance that was disconnected. And I'm using this syntax here so that we, if disconnected is null and we invoke this event, it's not going to throw an error. Note that the syntax will properly handle thread synchronization, so we don't have to alias out that event into a local variable, as you would have to do traditionally when doing this sort of thing. But that's our onDisconnect method. So let's scroll up to our disconnected and change his event type to action of client context. So we get a reference to that object that was disconnected. With that all out of the way, we can go back into our main lobby service. And so I'm just going to close out these two files, and we can properly implement our add player. So the first thing I'm going to do is make some checks. I'm going to say if context systems has, which doesn't exist yet, and we'll make that in a second, main lobby system, which also doesn't exist yet, then throw new RPC exception. Come on, you can do it. RPC exception, you are already in the main lobby. And then I'm going to say, if not, context is authenticated, throw new RPC exception, client not authenticated. We could also return deferred failures if we want as well. Then I'm going to say return fiber.enqueueDeferred. And I'm going to say, and so at this point I can go ahead and start doing other checks and start adding things to our private main lobby service. So inside of this Lambda, inside this closure, we are now on the main lobby service fiber. So we're no longer on the fiber that handles requests from the context. So we're now working in a synchronization context where we can access and safely manipulate private fields of this main lobby service. But we are going to need some private fields here to work with this. And the first one is going to be a private read-only dictionary. Come on, you can do it. Of int and main lobby system, which of course doesn't exist yet. And we'll call this players. And of course, we'll need to instantiate that. So I'll copy this over because autocomplete is not going to work for that. And so now we have the players here. So now inside of our fiber enqueue deferred, we can safely reference our players field without having to worry about thread synchronization. So I can say if players dot contains key context user details ID, then throw new RPC exception. Come on. You are already in the main lobby. Again, we could also return a deferred failure as well, if we wanted to. I do believe I made an overload of enqueue deferred that accepts an action that returns a deferred. Yes, I did. So then we can go ahead and say, let's see here. So at this point, we can add our disconnect handler. So I'm going to say context.disconnected plus equals, and I'm going to say client disconnected, which is a method that doesn't exist yet. We can go ahead and stub that out. I can say create method client disconnected, and we can say context there. And before we do that, actually, I do want to go ahead and check to see if the context disconnected before it entered the fiber. So I'm going to say if context is connected or not is connected, then throw new RPC exception client disconnected early. So that means the client disconnected after this code ran, but before this code ran. So the client disconnected after we returned from add player with our deferred, but before the synchronization context picked up this enqueue deferred. And for here, what we're going to do is we are going to create the system. I'm going to say var system equals context systems create and main lobby system, which of course doesn't exist yet. And then we're going to say players.add context user details ID, comma system, so we can keep track of all the users that are connected. So we do need to do other things here. In fact, between these two things, we need to do some things. We need to notify system of existing players. I'll put these in to-dos. And then I'll say to-do notify system of existing lobbies. To-do notify other players of new players. So we'll do that later. We have to actually introduce a new sort of thing, a new sort of way to deal with proxies, and we'll do that in the next video in order to pass all these notifications around. But for now, we'll just keep it like it is. Furthermore, we'll need other primitives or other DTOs to inform players about these players, but stuff and things. Okay, so what about client disconnected? What's that going to do? Well, client disconnected is simply going to, well, remove the client. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to introduce another method before I write client disconnected. And it's simply going to be public deferred called remove player, player context master context. And for this, I'm going to say if not context systems has. Actually, well, let's see here. A better way to handle this would actually be to do this inside of the fiber. So we'll enqueue deferred. And then I'm going to say main lobby system, and I'm going to say if not context dot systems try_get, which is another one we don't have. Try_get system, or try_get. I'll just do try_get here. So try_get out system. Then we're going to go ahead and say throw new RPC exception, and we'll simply say you are not in the main lobby. And then we can go ahead and say context.disconnect minus equals client disconnected. So we'll remove that event handler. And then we'll say players.remove context.id, or context user details ID. And we'll say context systems.destroy main lobby system. And then that'll notify the player, of course. And then I'll say to do notify other players of player leaving. So now we can implement our client disconnected handler. Our client disconnected handler is simply going to say remove player, cast to player context master context. Because we do know that any context we will receive from client disconnected is going to be of type player context master, because the only time we attach ourselves to this event handler is when we have a player context master. Okay, so we do have to implement the try_get method on our client systems as well as the has. We can do contains here instead of has, I think. I think that's better. So now we can jump into our client systems, and I'll just move these side by side so we can just go down the methods that we don't have yet. So we need contains. Contains is pretty easy. We're simply going to, how about underneath get, I'll say public bool contains, and we'll say tConcrete type. And I'll simply say return concrete types to systems contains type of tConcrete type. And while we're here, we can also make a non-generic version of this method. Contains type concrete type. And in fact, we can write these two methods in terms of each other. So I can say return this guy will simply say this contains will simply return contains of concrete type, and this contains will simply return contains passing in type of tConcrete type. So now these two methods depend on each other. So now we need our try_get. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll do a non-generic try_get first. I'll say public bool try_get, and this will take in a type, concrete type, and an out. And the out is going to be of our base server type, and I believe that is iSystem base. So it'll say out iSystem base system. And for this, we're simply going to return concrete types to systems try_get. We're just going to defer this directly into our dictionary, because it's basically just a wrapper over our dictionary here. And now we can do the generic form of try_get. So I'll say public bool try_get tConcrete type out tConcrete type system, which will, for this, what we're going to do is we're going to say bar system, or sorry, iSystem base system, if not try_get. In fact, we don't have to delegate into this try_get here. I'm going to go, well, we can. In case we change the implementation of one, the other will change as well, so that makes the code a little nicer. So tConcrete type out system. So if not try_get, then return false. Whoops, we'll call this untyped system. And of course, we do have to initialize system to null as well. So our out parameter has to be null. And for our out parameter to be null, we have to make sure that we add a generic type constraint for it to be a class. So I'm going to say where tConcrete type system is a iSystem base as well as a class. And that'll allow us to assign it to null. Class has to come first. I always forget that. So it's a class that implements iSystem base. And now we can simply return our cast to tConcrete type of system. Or of untyped system. Or, whoops, what am I doing? Return true, system equals cast to tConcrete type. Wow, sorry guys. Stuff and things. There we go. Okay, it's done. So now we have our awesome try_get. So we have our try_get and we have our contains. So we can go ahead and close out of that. So again, really, client systems is more or less a wrapper around this dictionary, but it does a whole lot of other stuff in regards to instantiating and dealing with systems. So now we just have to implement our main lobby system. So to do that, I'm going to start off in our base components and open up System Master. We already have a main lobby system here. We already have our interfaces for this done. So now I just have to write a concrete server type for that. So I'm going to open up our master systems, and I'm going to right click. Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to hit Alt Insert, new class, main lobby system. And now that that's implemented, I'm going to make sure that I make it have the right type. So it's a system base, so a player system base, which I believe is the correct one. Kind of forgot that. Yes, it is a player system base, and we'll pass in a main lobby system server, main lobby system client, and it'll implement main lobby system server. So we'll leave that as it is right now, just because I want to make the code on the left compile first. So we'll move that off to the side, and I'll come over here and I'll import that namespace. So now we shouldn't have any more errors on our main lobby server. So before we move on and talk about the main lobby system, which we're just going to step out in this video, let's go over the main lobby service. So again, it has a fiber, it has a synchronization context, and it's its own thread fiber. And it has a dictionary of players. So pretty straightforward. We start our fiber. To add a player, we make sure that they're not already in the main lobby, as in they don't already have a main lobby system. We make sure they're authenticated. And then on our fiber, on our synchronization context, we make sure that we don't already have one of them here. So in case some sort of weird thing happened where two requests came in at the exact same time and this check passed, but then this check fails because we already had one queued up. We make sure they're connected in case they disconnected between when this code executed and when the code surrounding it executed. We then add our disconnect handler. We create the main lobby system and we add them to our dictionary, which we'll use later to inform users as they enter who's logged in. And when we remove a player, we do basically the opposite. We make sure that they are in the system already. And if they are, we remove our disconnect handler, remove them from the dictionary, and we destroy the main lobby system. And then, of course, we notify everyone else that they're leaving. And then if the client disconnects at any point, we remove them from our main lobby service. So now, if I come over here to the right, here's our main lobby system. We inherit from player system base of iMain lobby system server and iMain lobby system client, and we implement, obviously, the iMain lobby system server. So now we'll go ahead and generate these method stubs, which just throw exceptions, but that's fine for our purposes. And at this point, we should be good to go. So we'll go ahead over here, and we'll compile. And then we'll jump into our client code, which I don't have that open. So let me go ahead and figure that out. Let's go ahead and launch Visual Studio and open up our client. I do have the client open in Unity. I just didn't have the Visual Studio instance open. And it decided to pop up in a random monitor because, of course, it did. I can never decide which monitor to pop up on. And let me see if I can get the right one. Yeah, that's the right one. And I'll pause while the solution loads. All right, so we now have this. Basically, all I'm going to have to do here is in our master service systems, remember we're on the client now, I just have to go ahead and create a class that implements the system. So it's going to be main lobby system. And for this, we'll just inherit from Unity system base of iMain lobby system server, iMain lobby system client, and it will implement iMain lobby system client. So we can go ahead and just implement all these. And it's still yelling at me for some reason because I don't know why it's still yelling at me. Oh, because ReSharper did not import the date time from system. So we go ahead and make sure that we have a using system at the top. But we can just go ahead and leave all these as empty. So these are all the messages that we can receive from the server. And of course, all the transport and all that fun stuff is handled by our awesome systems API. So jumping back into Unity, I do have the server running. I did do a compile. Did I do a compile? Yes, I did do a build. So we should have the latest version of the server running, and I can verify that by locating my logs, and I see that it did indeed start. So now I can go ahead and hit play, and I should get my choose user to log in as, but I got an exception. So let's go ahead and see what happened here. We got an exception that get type name. What did we get? We're getting a lot of exceptions here. So I'm going to take this entire thing here, and I'm going to grab it and copy it to my clipboard. And then I'm going to jump into Visual Studio, into our server project. I'm going to hold down Control E and T. And that's going to format it very nicely for us from ReSharper. And this is a terrifying, terrifying stack trace. But what seems to be the problem is that, and it says error, an exception was thrown on type. It says MySQL data entity EF6 specified in the application config file cannot be loaded. Make sure that blah blah blah. So it couldn't find MySQL data entity MySQL EF configuration. So the problem is it's trying to load up that, but it can't find it. So if I look at my references, we should see our MySQL.data, and we don't. We see system.data. Do we even see Entity Framework? We see Entity Framework and Entity Framework.SQL Server and system.data, but we don't see those other things. So that's kind of weird, because when I opened up BuzzMMO, maybe I completely missed something with these NuGet packages, and you guys caught it, and I didn't. And that's completely possible. So if we jump down here, we want to make sure that that MySQL.data .entities is added to our master and region. And now, if we look at it, it's saying that it's not checked. So I think what went wrong there was some weird... there's something weird going on with the UI here, because I swear that was checked. I swear that was checked, but it wasn't. So let's go ahead and add it for reals this time. And that's going to mess around with our configuration files. And so let's make sure it didn't mess around with them too much. No, it just added an assembly redirect, so that's cool. Now we can come in here and hit F6 again, so do a build for reals this time. Open up my logs. I'll tell you guys when it decides to start, and it's just started. So now I should be able to jump into Unity and hit play, and it should wait a sec, and we get our users. So now we are indeed working. So now if I say user 1, we get logging in, and we get a fatal error. Now the fatal error, according to my logs, was that system data entity migrations, automatic migrations disabled. MMO database context. So we're getting an error that automatic... Not be loaded. Why am I getting this error? Database. It's not giving me any more information here. Object reference not set to an instance of an object on disconnect. Let's deal with that guy first. So I just copied that stack trace to my clipboard, and coming back over here into the server, I'm going to locate this, and we're getting a object reference not set to an instance of an object right here on client context on disconnect. I think that's because client context wasn't set because there was an exception initializing it. So we can look at that later. Because I think resolving the first error will resolve this one. So it's saying something about migrations. Oh, no. I was reading the wrong exception. The right exception is there are pending changes. Either write the pending model to a code-based migration or do the migration. Okay, so that just means there's pending migrations to the database. So we can go ahead and I'm going to go open up my package manager console. And for my package, I'm going to say default project is BuzzMMO web. And I'm going to say add migration changes. It's a terrible migration name, but honestly, I don't know what could possibly be different here. Oh, no. We set the startup project as BuzzMMO Web, right? So that it picks up the connection string. Then, in our package manager console, we set our current project to BuzzMMO data. And now it's going to pick up the context in the BuzzMMO data project, but it's going to use the connection string from the web project. And that'll go ahead and drop a bunch of indices. Oh, this is something that you guys are going to have to deal with. This has to do with me using a different... using the old version of database for some testing, and now I'm running it against this. You know what? I don't care. I'm going to leave this migration here. You guys won't have this. So I'll go ahead and say update database here. And that'll go ahead and drop those things. And what are you yelling at me now? For type is not resolved for member 8. So we are running into most likely a version difficulty with our MySQL data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump back into manage NuGet packages. It looks like we might have different versions maybe. So we do have different versions of this library. So I wonder if we can go ahead and update all of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and just straight up update MySQL data and say update. I'm going to update it across the board. So every single project is that has a reference to this is going to get the same version, and hopefully that will resolve that issue. So it's trying to grab some sort of weird type out of something that might not be the correct version of that assembly. That's usually what happens when you get errors like that. Either that or we're missing an assembly redirect, but I would be curious as to why we would be missing an assembly redirect now and not previously, because this code indeed used to work. So we'll go ahead and just make sure that this is all working and up to date. I generally don't like doing big updates like this across the board, but I do really want to make sure that our MySQL data version is the same on every single one of these projects, because that can cause some potential issues. I'm going to go ahead and trigger a rebuild of the solution just to make sure that all of those new versions that we just made get copied into the appropriate directories, depending on which, I'm not entirely sure which directory that the PowerShell tool is using to locate assemblies. And we're running into a build tasks. I'm unsure of who's might be using that directory, but I'm just going to go ahead and restart Visual Studio entirely. That usually resolves that issue. And scanning new and updated MEF components. That's interesting. Anyway, I'll go ahead and pause the video. All right, we're back. I'm going to go ahead and hit F6, make sure everything gets built, and build successful. So, yeah, I don't know. Come back here, and because we did a rebuild, obviously we'll get new assemblies here, and Unity has to recompile, and we'll hit play, and Unity will promptly crash. You know, today really isn't my day with this. But it happens when you have large projects like this, and weird dependencies, and dependencies especially on third-party projects, and having so many projects in a solution, this sort of stuff can happen. And you just kind of have to deal with it, and dealing with it is usually just going by the most likely culprit and hoping for the best. All right, we're logged in, and there was a fatal error. So, table user in games does not exist. That's interesting. It's interesting because I don't have a reference to any entity called user in games, I don't believe. I do not have a reference to anything called user in games, so why is it querying that? That's an odd thing to do. Oh yeah, I did never actually perform that update database. So let's go ahead and do that now. This is a problem I'm only running into. You guys shouldn't run into this because you guys should have a clean database. Okay, all right. Of course, make sure that your startup project is a project with a proper connection string, and make sure we select buzzmmo.data. Isn't this fun? No, I was being sarcastic. So make sure we apply the migration. And we still run into that issue. Type is not resolved for member. MySQL exception, MySQL data. Don't care. That's probably a serialization error because it's trying to serialize the exception. But what I think I'm going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to completely nuke that migration entirely. So goodbye migration. And with that migration out of the way, I'm just going to nuke that database. And the reason I'm doing this is because let's see here. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm working with a database that just isn't currently synchronized at all with our current code base because I was playing around with a lot of stuff on my own. So I'll go ahead and just delete all these tables out and start fresh. And by deleting all these tables out, come on, which is always fun to do because you have to make sure to respect the foreign keys. Deleting all these tables will go ahead and reset this to how it should be on your guys' end. And then I do a package manager console update database. And this should succeed. I don't see any reason why this shouldn't succeed. Yep, it's applying all the migrations, it's running our seed method, and we're done. Okay, so that was just caused by me working on this project behind the scenes on my own and using the same database and then going back and trying. That's something that should never really happen in a production scenario anyway. So now we can go ahead and try to log in again. And we get a bunch of users that I'm not entirely sure why they would be in there to begin with. And we still get the same error. Wait, which database are we even connecting to? We're connecting to... Where are you, Mr. Connection String? Wrong one. We want to open up server master app.config connection strings. We are connecting to BuzzMMO2, but it created 1 million users for some reason, when there should only be one. Are we still using the... Oh, right. It's because of this, remember? I never did the debug set available players on the proper users, so that's one thing. However, entering in with a user of 1 should work regardless, because that has an ID of 1 as well as what I have in here, so that's interesting. But let's go ahead and fix this first. So set available players, I'm going to go ahead and say database.users.select. And I'm going to say user goes into, let's do it like that. Users goes into new user details, passing in user ID, user username, and new hash set. Don't have to pass in string there. It should be, no, won't be inferred because you can't do inference like that. User.roles.select, role goes into role.name. So that'll actually pass in the all of the users, and of course I do have to convert this into, I believe it's an array that I'm after, and it is, so .toArray. Which requires me to bring in, no it doesn't, because I am doing this on the wrong thing. ToArray, there we go. Okay, so that error, all those errors should go away, and it doesn't, because our hash set wants an IEnumerable of string, and we are passing in an IEnumerable of string. So I don't know what you're yelling at, Mr. Hash Set. Argument 3, cannot convert from string array to hash set. Because I did the toArray on the wrong thing. I wanted to do the toArray on this select. There we go. So now I want to go ahead and recompile. I'm going to try it one more time. After a recompile and a server restart. I'm really curious as to why I'm getting user in games doesn't exist. Because to my knowledge, users in games is a table that shouldn't be referenced anywhere. So for that, we actually got a exception here. It says only parameterless constructors and initializers are supported in linked entities. The reason we did that, or that happened, was because I did that select on the users like that. I want to do a users.toList here. And I want to do a users.include u goes into u.roles.toList. And the reason I want to convert it into a list right here is because the select is actually very intelligent. It tries to determine what properties that you're trying to grab from that value, and you can only pass in a certain subset of C# into this lambda if you're in the context of querying a database. But by doing the toList here, it'll convert that database query into a normal C# list, and then this select will be done on the IEnumerable. I could have, instead of done toList, I could have also done as enumerable, which actually would be more performant, so I'm going to go with that. So now if we come over here and hit run, we hopefully won't get that exception. We should instead get our admin, and we click on that, and we logged in. So don't ask me what all of that users in database thing was about. Maybe I needed to recompile the server code. I don't know. But the point is we should now be in the lobby, and we are lobby.unity. And if we open up game context and click on systems, we should see in our inspector that we have a main lobby system, and the main lobby system is created. So that means that the server told the client to create the main lobby system, and it was created on the client. All right, so that's where we'll leave this video off. It turned into a little bit longer than I wanted it to because of those errors that I ran into. But again, that's just the nature of working with a large project and accidentally working against a database with two separate projects that were in two different states of disrepair. So apologize for that, and we'll see you guys in the next video.